You didn't stumble into this video by accident. Let that land for a moment before you scroll past it, before your mind rushes to explain it away as coincidence or algorithm or idle curiosity. Something in you paused. Something in you pressed play, and that something has a name, even if you have not been able to say it out loud yet. You are a chosen one. Not in the way that phrase gets thrown around casually, not as flattery, not as something to make you feel temporarily better about a hard season. I mean it in the most grounded, most specific, most personal way possible. There is a work that exists on this earth that only you can finish. There is a thread woven into the fabric of this world that only your hands were designed to pull. And the reason you are here, watching this, in this exact moment of your life, is because that work is not done. It has been waiting, and the waiting is over. You are not like everyone around you. You never quite were. From the time you were young, there was something in you that could not fully settle into the paths others seemed to walk so easily. You watched people around you plug into systems, accept limitations, build lives that looked complete from the outside, and you loved them. You admired them even, but you knew, somewhere very quiet and very certain, that you were not built for that. Not because you were better, but because you were different. You were called to something that does not have a blueprint yet, because you are the one who is supposed to draw it. And that awareness, that quiet knowing, has not always felt like a gift. There have been seasons when it felt like a burden, when you looked around and wondered why clarity came so easily to others and so slowly to you. When the work you knew you were supposed to do felt too large, too undefined, too far away. When the gap between who you are right now and who you are supposed to become felt unbearable. I know those seasons. I am here to tell you that every single one of them was part of the preparation, not the punishment. There are specific signs that only the ones who carry this kind of calling will recognize. The first is that your dreams have been unusually vivid lately, more vivid than normal, almost instructional, as if something is trying to show you something you have not been able to see during the day. You wake up and the feeling stays with you longer than a dream should. The second is that you have felt a restlessness you cannot fully explain to the people closest to you. Not depression, not ingratitude, but a holy agitation, a sense that you are not yet doing what you are supposed to be doing, even when your life looks fine by any external measure. The third is that you have been encountering the same themes, the same words, the same kinds of messages, across completely separate places, different sources pointing to the same thing, as if reality itself is underlining a sentence for you. The fourth is that relationships and environments that once felt comfortable have begun to feel misaligned, not because they are bad, but because you are growing in a direction they were not built to hold. The fifth is a grief you carry for a version of your life that has not happened yet, a mourning for unlived potential, for the work that sits inside you uncompleted, and this grief is not despair. It is a call. Those are not the signs of someone falling apart. Those are the signs of someone being assembled. You are in the middle of something far more important than it looks from where you are standing right now. The confusion is not chaos. The delay is not abandonment. The discomfort in your chest when you think about all the things still unfinished, all the work still uncalled, all the potential still sitting in the quiet places inside you, that discomfort is not a sign that you have failed. It is the sound of something being made ready. You are what some traditions call an earth angel, not a being without struggle, not someone immune to pain, but someone whose presence changes the temperature of the rooms they walk into. Someone whose words, when they are finally spoken in the right places, rearrange what other people thought was fixed. Someone who carries a frequency that does not match the ordinary noise of the world, because it was not meant to. It was meant to cut through it. And this video, this moment, this particular intersection of your attention and this message was not random. Heaven does not broadcast on this frequency to people who are not ready to receive it. The fact that you are here, that something in you did not scroll away, that you are still listening, is itself confirmation. You have been asking, in your own way, in your own language, whether the work still matters, whether it is too late, whether the version of you that carries all of that unfinished purpose is still valid. The answer coming back to you right now is not a maybe, it is a yes. It has always been a yes. The work you are called to do on earth is real. It is specific. It is urgent, not in a way that creates panic, but in a way that creates clarity. And this message exists to help you stop doing everything else before you finish that. To help you recognize what is yours to complete and what is distraction. To help you walk forward into the exact territory that was always marked with your name. You have not been waiting for this moment. This moment has been waiting for you. There is something that needs to be said before anything else, and it needs to be said slowly, because you have probably heard versions of it before, but never quite in the way that actually reached you. What you have been carrying is not weakness. What you have been living through is not evidence that you were wrong about yourself. And the fact that it has taken this long, that the work is still unfinished, that you are still in the middle of something you thought you would have completed by now, none of that means what your worst moments have told you it means. I want to name 4 things. 4 specific experiences that people in the middle of a calling season will recognize immediately, not because they are vague enough to apply to anyone, but because they are precise enough to apply to you. And as I name them, I want you to notice which ones land in your chest rather than just in your head. That landing sensation is not coincidence. That is recognition. The first is a wave of grief that arrives without warning. Not grief about something that just happened, but grief about the past. Old losses that you thought you had processed, coming back to the surface at unexpected moments, in the car, in the shower, in the middle of an ordinary Tuesday, a sudden ache for a version of your life that did not unfold the way you had believed it would. You find yourself mourning a relationship that ended years ago, or a season of life that passed without giving you what you needed from it, or a younger version of yourself who had a particular kind of hope that has been harder to access lately. This wave comes unbidden and leaves you feeling like you are behind in some way you cannot quite name. What I need you to understand is that this wave is not depression dressed up as memory. It is your soul doing inventory. It is your spirit taking stock of everything the journey has cost you before it takes you somewhere new. The grief is not evidence that you are broken. It is evidence that you are about to move. The second experience is that certain places and certain people that once felt comfortable and familiar have begun to feel heavy. Not toxic, not terrible, just heavy. Like a coat that fit perfectly 2 seasons ago, but now pulls on your shoulders in ways that make it hard to breathe. You sit in rooms you have sat in many times before, and something feels off. You have conversations that used to restore you, and now they leave you more depleted than when you arrived. And the confusing part is that you love these people. You are not looking to escape them. But there is a growing distance between where you are going and where those spaces were built to lead, and your spirit is registering that distance as weight. This is not a call to abandon anyone. It is a signal that you are outgrowing a container that was never meant to be permanent. The third is a recurring dream or a recurring image of a door. It may not be literally a door in your dream. It might be a threshold, a hallway, a room you cannot quite enter, a window that shows you something you cannot reach. But there is a sense in this recurring image of something on the other side that you are supposed to access and have not yet been able to reach. You wake from these dreams with a feeling that is equal parts longing and frustration. Because you can almost see it, you can almost feel what is on the other side, but something keeps the crossing incomplete. That image is not your subconscious tormenting you. That is a preview being shown to someone who is almost ready. The door in your dream is not locked. You were simply not yet standing in the exact position to push it open. You are almost there now. The fourth is that the same message keeps finding you from different directions. A word from a sermon that sounds too specific to be general. A line in a book that stops you in the middle of a paragraph. A conversation with a stranger that circles back to the exact thing you have been quietly wrestling with. A video that appears in your feed at the precise moment you needed to hear it. These are not coincidences accumulating. This is a conversation that has been happening between you and something larger than circumstance. When the same message arrives through multiple unconnected sources, that is not repetition for its own sake. That is confirmation for someone who needed to hear it more than once before they believed it. Now I want to sit with you in the pain for a moment, because it would be wrong to rush past it. The sleepless nights are real. Those hours between 2 and 4 in the morning when the quiet gets too loud, and every unfinished thing you are carrying starts speaking at once. The sense that you are doing something wrong, even when you cannot identify what it is. The loneliness of carrying a vision that the people around you cannot fully see or fully support, not because they do not love you, but because they were not given the same sight. The feeling of being fundamentally misunderstood, not just in one relationship, but in a more foundational way. As if the truest parts of you have never quite had a language that the world around you speaks fluently. That loneliness is real. I am not going to tell you it is not. But here is what I also need you to understand. There is a difference, a profound and important difference, between being overlooked and being positioned. And most of the pain of this season has come from interpreting one as if it were the other. When you are overlooked, something has been missed through neglect or through error. The opportunity passed because no one was paying attention. The door closed because no one thought to open it for you. That is a tragedy of omission. It happens, it is real, but it is not what has been happening to you. When you are positioned, you are placed, deliberately, intentionally, with full knowledge of what the placement is for. The potter does not leave the clay sitting on the shelf because the pot is not worth making. The potter leaves the clay in a particular place because the making is not yet complete, and moving it too soon would break what is being formed. What has looked like being overlooked in your life has, in the majority of cases, been positioning. The relationships that did not work out positioned you away from a future that would have cost you more than you know. The opportunities that closed positioned you toward the ones that will open at exactly the right moment. The seasons of waiting positioned you to carry what is coming without being crushed by its weight. You were not forgotten, you were placed. And there is a world of difference between those two things. I know that is easy to say and harder to feel. I know there are days when positioning feels indistinguishable from abandonment, when the logic of it makes sense in your mind but does not reach the ache in your chest. I know that, and I am not asking you to stop feeling the ache. I am asking you to let the ache coexist with a new understanding. You were placed here, in this season, with this particular collection of unfinished work and unreached potential, because what you are being prepared to carry requires exactly the person you are becoming through the carrying of it. The work that is waiting for you on the other side of this season is not going to be handed to someone who was comfortable. It is going to be entrusted to someone who has been refined. And refinement is not comfortable. It is not quiet. It is not painless. But it is productive in ways that comfort never could be. You have been showing up to this season with more faith than you have given yourself credit for. Showing up when you were exhausted is faith. Continuing to believe when the evidence was thin is faith. Pressing play on a video like this one, still looking, still listening, still reaching for something that your circumstances have not yet confirmed, that is faith in its purest and most powerful form. And faith of that quality does not go unwitnessed. Right now, across the world, other chosen ones are sitting in their own versions of this exact moment. Some of them are watching from a phone screen in a quiet room late at night. Some of them are listening through headphones on a commute, surrounded by people, but feeling very alone. Some of them are in the middle of a season that looks successful from the outside and feels unfinished from the inside. And all of them are hearing something in this message that they have needed someone to say out loud for a very long time. You are not in a room alone. You are in a room full of people who carry what you carry and who are learning, along with you, what it means to stop running from it and start finishing it. If this is landing somewhere real in you, if one of those 4 signs felt less like a description and more like a mirror, I want to ask you to do one small thing. Type the words "I see it" in the comments right now. Not for me, not as a performance, but as an act of declaration for yourself. Because there is something that happens when you move a recognition from the inside of your chest to the outside world, even in the smallest way. It becomes more real. It becomes more anchored. It becomes harder to talk yourself out of in the moments when the doubt is loudest. Type "I see it." And while you do, know that every other person who types those same words is standing with you in this, invisible to each other, but not invisible to the one who placed every one of you in this moment at the same time. And if this message is doing something in you, if it is giving language to something you have been carrying quietly for a long time, I want to ask you to share it, not because numbers matter, but because somewhere in your circle there is another chosen one who has been waiting for someone to name what they went through. Your share might be the moment that changes everything for them. Like this video, subscribe if you are new here, and if you want to support this work so that messages like this one can keep reaching the people who need them, there is a way to do that in the description below. Every contribution keeps this going. Every share extends the reach. And every chosen one who finds this message because you passed it on is part of the work you were called to do. There is a moment in every chosen one's journey where the recognition is not enough on its own. Where knowing that you are called, knowing that the work is real, knowing that the positioning was intentional and not punishment, all of that knowing sits in your chest like a truth that has not yet found its feet. You understand it, you believe it, or you are trying to. But understanding and believing are not the same as moving. And what this season requires from you right now is not more. Understanding. It is the first step of movement. So before we go any further into the depth of what your calling means and what it is asking of you, I want to give you something practical, something you can hold in your hands today, something that requires no special equipment, no particular location, no specific level of spiritual maturity or emotional readiness, because one of the most effective tools the enemy of your purpose uses against chosen ones is the illusion that you need to be more. prepared before you can begin. That you need to feel better, think clearer, have more resources, resolve more wounds, reach a higher state of readiness before the work can start. That illusion has cost you time you did not need to lose. And today, right now, we interrupt it. The tool I want to give you is called the Threshold Protocol. I chose that name intentionally because a threshold is exactly where you are. You are not far from your next season. You are at its edge, and the Threshold Protocol is a 3-step practice that you can use anywhere, at any time, in any emotional state, to move yourself from passive knowing into active alignment with the work you were called to finish. It takes less than 10 minutes. It costs nothing. It requires only your willingness to be honest with yourself for a few moments. And if you do it consistently, not perfectly, not ceremonially, but consistently, something in the landscape of your daily experience will begin to shift in ways that are quiet at first and then undeniable. Here is how it works. The first step is called the release of the near miss. I want you to think of one thing, just one, that you are genuinely grateful did not happen. Not something abstract, something specific. A relationship that looked like an opportunity, but would have redirected your entire life away from where you are supposed to go. A job you almost took that would have locked you into a version of yourself you were supposed to outgrow. A decision you were about to make that something stopped you from making. And at the time you called that something bad luck or bad timing. But standing where you stand now, you can see, even dimly, that being stopped was a form of protection. Chosen ones carry a particular kind of grief about the things they did not get. But they rarely make space to be grateful for the things they were not given, the things that looked like losses but were actually redirections. The release of the near miss is the practice of consciously, deliberately, specifically naming one of those redirections and saying out loud, even if only in a whisper, "Thank you for what did not happen." Because what did not happen made room for what is coming. This step is not about toxic positivity. It is not about pretending that the loss did not hurt, or that the closed door did not leave you standing in the cold. It is about widening your interpretive lens wide enough to include the possibility that some of what you mourned was mercy, in a form you did not recognize at the time. When you practice the release of the near miss regularly, you begin to develop what I would call a longer sight. You start to see your story with enough distance to notice the pattern that was invisible when you were inside the pain of it. And that longer sight is one of the primary tools you will need for the work that is ahead of you. The second step is called the Threshold Declaration. This connects directly to something that will become more meaningful as we move further through this message together, so hold it loosely for now and let it deepen as we go. The Threshold Declaration is a spoken statement said out loud that positions your will in alignment with your calling for this specific day. Not for the rest of your life, not for the whole journey, just for today. It goes like this. You say, "I am not waiting for permission to become who I was made to be. The work assigned to me is already in motion. I align myself with it. Today, that is it." 3 sentences spoken out loud, not whispered apologetically, not performed dramatically. Just said with whatever level of conviction you can genuinely access in this moment. Because genuine conviction at 40% is worth more than performed conviction at 100%. The reason this declaration matters is because chosen ones have a particular vulnerability, which is the tendency to defer, to wait until the feeling is right, the timing is confirmed, the resources are in place, the circumstances are more favorable. The Threshold Declaration is the daily interruption of that tendency. It is the act of saying, with your own voice, in the real air of your real life, that you are not deferring today. That whatever level of readiness you currently have is enough to take the next step. That the alignment you need is not somewhere in the future. It is available right now, in this moment, through the act of claiming it. Spoken declarations are not magic. They are not incantations. They are posture. They are the physical, vocal, embodied act of orienting yourself toward what you believe is true, even when the belief is still fragile. And over time, with repetition, posture becomes instinct. The declaration you speak today, a little uncertainly, becomes the conviction you walk with naturally 6 months from now. That transformation happens one spoken sentence at a time. The third step is what I call the 7 minutes of open frequency. And this is where the practice deepens into territory that the first 2 steps have been preparing you for. After the release of the near miss and the threshold declaration, I want you to sit in complete silence for 7 minutes. No phone, no background music, no podcast, no ambient noise you have chosen as a distraction. Just you and the quiet. 7 minutes. That is all. Now I know that for many of you, 7 minutes of intentional silence sounds either very easy or almost unbearably difficult. And the ones who find it most difficult are often the ones who need it most urgently. Because what chosen ones are often running from, without fully realizing it, is the voice that speaks most clearly in the quiet. The voice that knows exactly what the work is. The voice that has been trying to give you instructions that the noise of your life keeps covering. The 7 minutes of open frequency is the practice of uncovering that signal. You do not have to meditate perfectly. You do not have to clear your mind completely. You do not have to achieve any particular state. You simply have to be still and willing. Willing to hear. Willing to receive. Willing to sit in the discomfort of silence long enough for something more important than comfort to come through. 7 minutes is not an arbitrary number. It is the precise window that researchers studying brainwave patterns have identified as the threshold at which the brain begins to shift from its default active state into a deeper, more receptive state of awareness. When you sit in intentional quiet for 7 minutes without external stimulation, something begins to happen in the brain that does not happen when you are busy, when you are scrolling, when you are filling the air with sound. A different quality of access opens. A different level of clarity becomes available. The instructions that your calling has been trying to download into your awareness find a channel that is no longer blocked. I am going to say more about the science behind this in a moment because it connects to something I want to share with you that has genuinely changed thousands of lives in the same kind of season you are in right now. But for now, I want you to understand the 7 minutes of open frequency as a doorway, not a destination, a doorway. What it opens into is worth more than 7 minutes of your discomfort. The threshold protocol, all 3 steps together, takes less than 10 minutes to complete. You can do it in the morning, before anything else enters your attention. You can do it in a parked car before you go into a building. You can do it at night when the house goes quiet. The location does not matter. The posture does not matter. What matters is the consistency. What matters is the decision, made again each day, to show up to your own calling before you show up to everything else that is competing for your time and attention. Because here is the truth that most chosen ones take far too long to learn. The work you are called to do on this earth will not wait indefinitely. It has a season. It has a window. Not because the calling expires, but because the people who need what you carry are already waiting. They are already in rooms that need what only you can bring into them. Every day that you defer the work is a day that those rooms stay missing something. Every day that you choose the noise over the quiet is a day that the signal gets a little harder to hear. Not impossible, but harder. You were not called to a convenient life. You were called to a consequential one, and consequential lives require the discipline of daily return. Return to the quiet. Return to the declaration. Return to the practice that keeps you oriented toward the work, even on the days when nothing around you confirms that the work is real. The threshold protocol is that return, made simple enough that the only reason not to do it is the same reason that has kept you from the work this whole time, which is the fear that it might actually work, that if you show up to the quiet consistently enough, you might actually hear something, that if you hear something, you might actually have to respond to it, that if you respond to it, everything changes, everything changes. That is not a threat. That it's the promise. And you did not find your way to this message because you wanted things to stay the same. Before we go any further, I want to stay close to what the 7 minutes of open frequency just opened in you, because what I am about to share is not a detour from the spiritual territory we have been walking through together. It is the deepest confirmation of it. It is the place where what heaven has been saying about you and what science has been quietly discovering about human consciousness finally arrive at the same conclusion, spoken in 2 different languages, but pointing to exactly the same truth. Here is what researchers have found, and I want you to hear this not as a sales pitch but as a piece of evidence that the way you were built is not ordinary. Chosen ones carry a specific neurological frequency. It is not metaphor. It is not poetry. It is measurable, documentable, and reproducible in laboratory conditions. Scientists call it gamma. And the reason that matters for you, sitting in this exact season of your life, is that gamma is the brainwave signature associated with moments of sudden clarity, breakthrough thinking, creative insight, and what researchers describe as the integration of information across multiple brain regions simultaneously. In plain language, gamma is what your brain does when it is operating at its highest possible capacity. It is what Einstein's brain was doing when the theory arrived. It is what every person who ever solved the unsolvable problem, wrote the song that changed someone's life, made the decision that redirected their entire family line. It is what their brain was doing in that moment. And here is what they also found. In children, gamma waves are abundant, almost constant. Children live in a state of neurological openness that allows information, creativity, and perception to flow without the filters that adult life builds up over time. But as we age, as the pressures of survival and performance and social expectation begin to accumulate, those gamma waves become harder to access. The filters thicken, the noise increases, the signal gets buried under layers of stress and habit and the ordinary demands of keeping a life running. But it does not disappear. It is still there, waiting. Like a frequency that the radio is not currently tuned to, but that has been broadcasting continuously the entire time. The question that one particular researcher has spent more than 30 years trying to answer is this: is there a way to retune the brain deliberately, efficiently, and accessibly, without years of meditation practice, without pharmaceutical intervention, without any of the complicated prerequisites that most people in ordinary life cannot realistically meet? His name is Dr. James Rivers, a neuroscientist trained at MIT, whose research has included collaboration with some of the most rigorous scientific institutions in the world, including NASA. And the answer he arrived at, after decades of research and thousands of hours of testing across thousands of participants, is yes. The mechanism he identified is called brainwave entrainment, and the principle behind it is both elegant and profound. The brain, it turns out, is not fixed in its frequency patterns. It is responsive. It is adaptive. When exposed to specific external sound frequencies, delivered through audio in a precise and calibrated way, the brain naturally synchronizes with those frequencies. This is not suggestion. This is not placebo. This is measurable electrical activity in the brain shifting in real time in response to acoustic input. The brain hears the frequency. The brain matches the frequency. And when the frequency it matches is theta, which sits between 4 and 8 hertz and is associated with deep creativity, accelerated learning, and the kind of intuitive knowing that chosen ones describe as hearing something in the quiet. And when that theta state opens a pathway into gamma, the brain begins operating in a way that most people only access accidentally, in the shower, in the middle of the night, in the rare moments when the noise of life drops away long enough for something true to surface. Dr. Rivers spent those 30 years figuring out exactly how to recreate that condition deliberately, using binaural beats, which work by delivering slightly different frequencies to each ear so that the brain produces a third frequency in response. Combined with isochronic tones and precisely calculated sound sequences, he developed an audio program that does what years of meditation training attempts to do in 7 minutes. That is the length. 7 minutes. The same 7 minutes I asked you to sit in silence at the end of the threshold protocol. That was not accidental. That silence was preparing your brain for exactly this. The program is called the Genius Wave. And I want to tell you about 2 people whose experiences with it I think you will recognize, not because they are extraordinary, but because their circumstances were so deeply ordinary, so close to where you might be sitting right now. The first is a woman I will call Maya. Maya had spent 14 months in a season that looked functional from the outside, but felt hollow from the inside. She was doing everything right by most measures, showing up to her work, maintaining her relationships, keeping herself together. But at 3 in the morning, she was awake, as chosen ones so often are at that hour, sitting in the particular silence of a life that has not yet become what it is supposed to be. Started using the Genius Wave not with great faith, but with the cautious half-hope of someone who has tried other things and learned not to expect too much. The first night she used it, she slept through until morning for the first time in months. Not because the audio was a sleeping aid, but because something that had been running at a high frequency of anxiety in her nervous system finally found a different channel and settled into it. 3 weeks later, she sent a message that said only this: something has unlocked. I cannot explain it yet, but I know something has unlocked. The second person is a man who had been carrying a creative vision for years, a project he knew he was supposed to complete, work he had been circling for so long that he had started to wonder if the circling was the point and the completing would never come. He described his experience with the Genius Wave as less like motivation arriving and more like static clearing. The vision did not change. The work did not suddenly become easier in a superficial sense. But the interference between him and the work, the layer of noise and doubt and neurological overload that had been sitting between his intention and his action, that layer thinned. And in the thinning, he began to move, slowly at first, then with a consistency that surprised him. The work he had been circling for years, he began to finish it. That some of you are sitting with a very reasonable question right now. You are thinking, $39 is not a small amount when money is already tight. When the season I am in has already asked so much of me. When trust does not come easily anymore. Because too many things have promised transformation and delivered disappointment. I want to honor that response. I want to tell you that your caution is not cynicism. It is wisdom earned through experience, and wisdom is not something I want to talk you out of. What I want to offer instead is this. Dr. Rivers built a 90-day money-back guarantee into the Genius Wave precisely because he understood that trust has to be earned and not assumed. 90 days is not a weekend trial. It is 3 months of genuine, consistent use, long enough to move through the initial resistance, long enough to give the brain the repeated exposure it needs to begin shifting its default patterns, long enough to know with certainty whether this is working for you or not. If at the end of 90 days you feel nothing has changed, you receive a full refund. No argument, no complicated process, no conditions attached to the promise. The regular price of the Genius Wave is $49. Through the link in the pinned comment below this video, it is available today for $39. That is the price that has been set for this specific window of availability. And I want to be honest with you that the window is real and it is limited. The number of copies available at this price is finite, and when they are gone, the price returns to $49. This is not a pressure tactic. It is a logistical reality that I would rather tell you plainly than let you discover by waiting too long and finding the offer has closed. There is one more thing I need to say clearly, because it matters for your protection. The only legitimate place to access the Genius Wave at this price, with the full 90-day guarantee intact, is through the single link in the pinned comment beneath this video. There are unauthorized versions circulating in other places online that do not carry the guarantee and may not carry the correct audio frequencies. If the frequencies are not calibrated correctly, the entrainment does not work, and you would have spent money on something that cannot do what the real program does. Please use only the pinned link. Your protection matters more than the convenience of finding it elsewhere. This is also not a program that will be available at this access point indefinitely. The combination of the reduced price and the guarantee and the direct link represents a specific window that has been opened for the people finding this message right now, in this season, because this is the season when the brain needs this kind of support most. The season of transition, the season of threshold, the season when the work is right at the edge of beginning, and the neurological infrastructure to sustain it is what stands between the vision and its completion. The Genius Wave will not do the work for you. Nothing can do that, but it can clear the channel through which the work wants to move. It can give your brain the 7-minute daily reset that allows the frequency of your calling to come through with less interference. It can help you access, consistently and deliberately, the state that chosen ones have always been capable of, but have rarely been able to sustain in the middle of ordinary, demanding, noisy life. The link is in the pinned comment. It will not be there forever. And if something in you already knows this is a yes, I want to encourage you to honor that knowing before the noise of the day has a chance to talk you back into waiting. There is something I want to hold with you for a moment before we move into what is next, and I want to hold it without rushing past it, without softening it into something easier to swallow, without reframing it prematurely into a lesson or a silver lining. Because one of the things that chosen ones are most often robbed of is the simple permission to acknowledge what the journey has actually cost, not what it is building, not what it is preparing, not what is coming on the other side, but what it has taken. What it has asked you to give up that you did not volunteer to give. What has been quietly removed from your life in the years that the work has been waiting. The Genius Wave will be there when you are ready. The link in the pinned comment is not going anywhere in the next few minutes. But right now, I need you to stay here with me. In this Because what I am about to say is the part that most people skip, the part that feels less productive than talking about destiny and calling and breakthrough, but that is in fact the foundation without which none of the rest can be built on solid ground. Let us talk about what the waiting has taken, not what it has given, not what it has produced in you, not the character it has developed or the resilience it has built. I want to talk about what it has taken, plainly, without the spiritual bypass that tells you to be grateful for the loss before you have been allowed to feel it. The waiting has taken relationships. Not just the relationships that ended because the other person left, but the relationships that never had the chance to begin because you were in a season that made real intimacy almost impossible to sustain. The friendships that drifted because you were in a place of internal intensity that was hard for ordinary social connection to hold. The romantic partnership that could have been, that you can see clearly in the negative space of your life, the shape of someone who was supposed to be there and is not because you are unlovable, but because the season you have been in has required a kind of solitude that love has not yet been able to fully penetrate. You did not choose that solitude entirely. It chose you, and it has cost you in ways that are real and that deserve to be named. The waiting has taken career momentum. There are things you should have built by now that are not yet built. Platforms that should be further along. Businesses that should be generating what they are not yet generating. Roles that you are more than qualified for, but that have not materialized in the timeline you mapped out with such certainty in earlier seasons. And the painful part is not just the gap between where you are and where you thought you would be. The painful part is watching people around you, people who started later, people who do not seem to carry what you carry, move into positions and opportunities that feel like they were supposed to have your name on them. That pain is legitimate. I am not going to tell you it is not. The waiting has taken the freedom to dream out loud. You remember when you could say the large things, the real things, the visions that lived at the deepest level of who you are, and you could say them without first calculating whether the person in front of you would diminish them. There was a time when the dream felt safe enough to speak in its full size. But after enough seasons of watching the dream meet silence or doubt, or the kind of meaning practical concern that carries the same weight as dismissal, you learned to curate, to offer a smaller version of the real thing, to keep the truest parts of the vision inside, where they could not be touched, but also where they could not breathe. That self-protective silence has been a form of grief that you carry every day without calling it grief. And the waiting has taken something perhaps most precious of all, and that is your easy trust in yourself. There was a version of you that moved through the world with a confidence in your own, knowing that did not require external validation to sustain itself. That version of you heard the inner voice and acted on it with a kind of cleanness and directness that did not stop to second guess or to calculate the odds of being wrong. The years of waiting, the years of stepping out and finding the timing not yet right, the years of believing something was about to shift and watching it not shift in the way you expected. Those years have layered doubt over that original confidence in ways that are subtle and cumulative, and very, very heavy. You still hear the inner voice, but now there is a pause between hearing and trusting that was not always there. And that pause has cost you decisions that should have been made and were not, movement that should have happened and was deferred, a version of yourself that should be further into the work by now. I am naming these things not to wound you but to witness you, because One of the specific burdens of chosen ones is that the cost of their journey is often invisible to everyone around them. People see the calling. They do not see the invoice. They celebrate what is coming without acknowledging what was paid to get here. And so you carry the cost in a kind of solitary accounting that nobody else can see or validate or share. But I see it, and more importantly, the one who placed the calling on your life sees it. Every relationship that did not happen, every opportunity that closed before you reached it, every version of the dream you had to swallow back down because the room you were in was not safe enough to hold it. Every morning you woke up and chose to keep going when the evidence for giving up was louder than the evidence for continuing. None of that invisible cost is invisible to heaven. It is accounted for, not in the abstract. Specifically, precisely, in the same way that every single day of a longer journey is counted by the one who designed the route. There is a man in the ancient text whose name was Joseph, and I want to tell you about the part of his story that most people rush past on their way, to the part where he becomes the second most powerful person in the most powerful nation on earth. I want to stay in the part before that, the part that lasted not days but years, the part where Joseph sat in a pit, placed there by the very people who should have championed him, the part where he was sold into servitude and built something in that context and then watched it collapse through no fault of his own. The part where he sat in prison with the correct interpretation of two dreams and watched the man whose dream he correctly interpreted walk back out into freedom and forget him completely. For 2 more years, Joseph did not have access to what was coming. He did not wake up in that prison with a clear theological framework for why the delay was productive. He did not have a video telling him that the waiting was positioning rather than punishment. He had the memory of a dream from his youth about his purpose, a dream that must have seemed increasingly improbable the longer the imprisonment lasted, and he had the daily choice to keep showing up to who he was in the middle of circumstances that had every right to make him someone smaller. What was taken from Joseph in those years was everything you might expect: his family, his freedom, his reputation, the easy confidence of a young man who had received a divine promise and assumed that the path to its fulfillment would be recognizable as a path. What was not taken from him, what could not be taken from him no matter how many layers of loss accumulated, was the calling itself. The dream did not expire in the prison. The purpose did not diminish in the pit. The assignment did not become less real because the circumstances made it look impossible. And I am not going to tell you yet how it resolved for Joseph, because this is not the moment for that part of the story. This is the moment to sit in the part of it that matches where you are, the part where the calling is intact and the circumstances are not confirming it, the part where you have given more than you bargained for and the return has not yet arrived in a form you can hold, the part where the only thing keeping you in the story is something deeper than strategy or optimism or the math of how long it should reasonably take. That something deeper is not naivety. It is not denial. It is not the refusal to see your situation clearly. It is the most sophisticated form of sight available to a human being. It is the capacity to hold two things simultaneously: the reality of the cost and the reality of the calling, the weight of what has been taken and the certainty of what is still coming, the pain of where you are and the knowledge of where you are going. Most people can only hold one of those at a time. Chosen ones are being trained to hold both. You have been paying for something. The bill has been real and it has been high, and you have paid it faithfully, even on the days when you did not feel faithful at all. And I want you to know, before we go anywhere else in this conversation, Before we talk about what is shifting and what is coming, and what the work looks like on the other side of this season, I want you to know first that the cost has been seen. The price you have paid has not been invisible to heaven. It has been received. And what is coming is not in spite of what it cost you. It is proportional to it. What was taken from you in those years, what Joseph carried in that prison, what every chosen one has paid through the long seasons of waiting, none of it happened inside ordinary time. And I need you to understand this before we move any further, because without this understanding, everything that follows will feel like comfort without foundation. What I am about to give you is not comfort. It is a new set of eyes. And once you see through them, the landscape of your entire story changes. There are two words in the ancient Greek language for time, and most people in the modern world live and breathe and measure their entire lives by only one of them. The first word is chronos. You already know this word, even if you have never heard it named. Chronos is the time of clocks and calendars. It is the time that accumulates in sequences, 1 second following another, 1 year adding to the last, linear and measurable, and entirely indifferent to meaning. Chronos does not care whether what is happening inside of it is significant, or wasted, or sacred. It simply moves. It simply passes. And when you measure your journey through the lens of Chronos, which is what most people around you have been doing without realizing it, what you see is delay. What you see is a gap between when something was supposed to happen and when it has not yet happened. What you see is a number of years that feels too large, and a list of accomplishments that feels too small, and a calendar that keeps moving forward in a direction that does not yet match the destination you were promised. But there is a second word, and this is the word that changes everything. The second word is kairos. Kairos does not mean a long time or a short time or a late time or an early time. Kairos means the right time, the appointed time, the moment that was specifically, intentionally, cosmically designed for what is meant to happen inside of it. Kairos is not a duration. It is a quality. It is not measured in how many months have passed, but in whether the conditions for what is meant to unfold are finally, precisely, completely in place. When the ancient writers who recorded the deepest spiritual wisdom of their generation spoke about time, they used kairos to describe the moments that mattered most. Not the ordinary passing of days, but the specific arrivals of what had been set in motion long before it could be seen. And here is what they understood that our modern chronos-obsessed world has nearly completely forgotten. Kairos cannot be rushed. Kairos cannot be manufactured by working harder or believing more intensely or positioning yourself more strategically. Kairos arrives when Kairos arrives, and its arrival is not random, it is not late, it is not indifferent to you. Its arrival is the moment when everything that was required for the fullness of what is coming has been assembled. You have been living inside what felt like Chronos time, measuring the gap, counting the seasons, doing the math of how long this has taken against how long it was supposed to take, and arriving at a number that has felt like failure or abandonment or some kind of cosmic oversight. But you have been in Kairos time this entire season, not moving toward it, inside it. The preparation that Kairos requires has been happening in you and around you and through you, ways that Chronos cannot measure, and that your current circumstances cannot fully reveal. What you have interpreted as the clock running out has actually been the conditions being perfected. What has felt like delay has been the final calibrations of a moment whose fullness you could not have contained any earlier than right now. This is not a reframe designed to make you feel better about a hard season. This is a description of what has actually been happening, while you were measuring time with the wrong instrument. Now I want to give you a second word, this one from the ancient Hebrew, and it will change the way you understand the years behind you as permanently and fundamentally as kairos changes the way you understand the moment in front of you. The word is kava. It is most often translated in modern texts simply as wait. But that translation is so impoverished compared to the actual meaning that it borders on misleading. Kava does not mean to sit still and hope. Kava does not mean to be passive and patient and quietly endure until something changes. The root of kava, the image embedded in the very structure of the word itself, is the image of twisting, of braiding, of taking multiple strands and winding them together under tension until what results is something with a tensile strength that none of the individual strands could have possessed on their own. Kava is the word for what a rope maker does. The rope maker does not simply sit and wait for a rope to appear. The rope maker takes the raw fibers, the individual threads that are each independently too fragile to bear significant weight, and works them together under deliberate, sustained tension. The twisting is not comfortable for the individual strands. The tension is real. The pressure of being wound against something else, of being forced into a new configuration, of losing the independent shape you had before the braiding began. That is not a peaceful process. But what it produces is something that can hold weight that none of the original strands could have held alone. Every year of your waiting has been a year of kava. Every season of tension, of being pressed against circumstances that felt too hard, of being wound through experiences that changed your shape in ways you did not choose, has been adding to the tensile strength of the rope. That is you. The isolation that felt like abandonment was a strand being twisted into position. The disappointment that felt like failure was a strand being added to the braid. The relationships that stretched you beyond what felt bearable were fibers being wound under tension into something that will hold a weight you have not yet been asked to carry, but that is coming. You have been sitting still. You have been kava. You have been in the active, costly, transformative process of becoming something with a strength that passive waiting never could have produced. The years have not been taken from you. They have been woven into you. And the rope that has been made through this process is the exact rope that the work ahead of you requires. You are not delayed. You are assembled. And now I want to give you one more layer of understanding. Because kairos and kava together tell you about time and about process. But there is a third reality of this season that needs to be named. And it is the reality of where the assembly has been taking place. In the ancient narrative tradition, there is a recurring terrain that shows up at the most important moments in the most important stories. It is called the wilderness season. And when you encounter it in the ancient texts, it is never accidental. It is never punishment without purpose. The wilderness in the most profound stories is the appointed geography of transformation. It is the place where the person who is being prepared for something significant is taken away from the familiar structures and the comfortable environments and the confirming relationships, not to be destroyed, but to be changed in ways that the familiar environment could not have facilitated. Moses was in the wilderness for 40 years before the burning bush. David was in the wilderness running from Saul before the throne. Elijah was in the wilderness when the still small voice came that redirected his entire understanding of where the divine presence actually lived. Jesus himself was led into the wilderness not by accident or by the failure of his preparation, but immediately and intentionally after the most powerful affirmation of his identity that the narrative records. Right after the voice from heaven said, "This is my beloved Son, the wilderness began. The wilderness is not where chosen ones go when they have failed. The wilderness is where chosen ones go when they are being prepared for something that the non-wilderness world could not have produced in them. And if your life in recent seasons has felt like a wilderness, if it has felt stripped down and unfamiliar and uncomfortably quiet and lacking in the usual markers of progress and affirmation that you used to be able to rely on, I want you to hear this as clearly as anything else I have said today. You are not in the wilderness because you did something wrong. You are in the wilderness because what you are being prepared to carry requires the kind of formation that only the wilderness can do. Wilderness is not punishment. Wilderness is preparation. And there is no one being prepared for something significant who gets to skip it. The wilderness does specific things that comfortable seasons cannot do. It strips away the identities that were never really yours, the versions of yourself that were built to satisfy other people's expectations or to succeed within systems that were never designed to hold your real calling. It removes the noise that prevented you from hearing the signal clearly. It eliminates the distractions that were so comfortable and so familiar that you might never have voluntarily released them. It confronts you with the most fundamental questions about who you are and what you believe and what you are willing to carry. Not in the abstract, but in the specific, daily, unglamorous reality of a season that provides very little external confirmation. And when the wilderness has done its work, when the stripping and the questioning and the reforming have reached their completion, what emerges is not a diminished version of who you were before. What emerges is the person who was always inside the person before, but who could not fully surface until the layers that were not truly you had been removed. You have been in a wilderness, perhaps for longer than felt fair, perhaps through losses that felt disproportionate to anything you had done to deserve them. Perhaps through a satat, statism sat, that has tested the foundations of everything you thought you believed about how this works, and whether it works and whether you are really seen inside of it. The wilderness is ending, not because you have endured long enough to earn the exit, but because the preparation is complete. The kairos of your emergence is not a future date on a calendar you cannot see. It is a present condition that is already assembling itself in the invisible territory just ahead of where you are standing. The kava of all those years has produced something in you that is strong enough now to carry what is coming without being crushed by its weight. You were not delayed. You were not overlooked. You were not forgotten in the wilderness. You were formed there, specifically, intentionally, with full knowledge of what the formation was for. And what the formation was for is the work, the specific, irreplaceable, only you can finish it work that this entire message has been building toward. The work that is waiting on the other side of the wilderness, not as a distant promise, but as an immediate assignment whose hour has arrived in Kairos time, right now, in the life of the person you have become through the kava of everything you have walked through to get here. You are not being assembled, still you have been assembled, and the assembling was not wasted. It was the point. Something is already moving. I want you to feel that before I explain it, because the explanation will reach you more deeply if the feeling arrives first. There is a shift that has been happening in the invisible architecture of your life, beneath the surface of what you can see and measure and confirm with your eyes. And it has been building momentum in the exact same way that weather builds before it arrives. You cannot see the storm coming from inside the house. But if you step outside, feel the pressure in the air. If you notice the particular quality of silence that precedes something significant, you know. You know without being able to prove it yet. And that knowing, that anticipatory certainty that something is about to break open in your life is not wishful thinking. It is spiritual perception. It is the ability of someone who has been in the wilderness long enough to read the signs that most people cannot read because they have never needed to develop that particular sensitivity. What is moving right now in your life is real, and I want to describe it to you across 3 specific territories, 3 areas where the shift is already underway, even if the evidence has not yet become visible enough for you to feel certain about it. Because part of what this season requires from you is the willingness to act on what you can sense before it becomes what you can see. The ones who wait for full visibility before they move are not the ones who finish the work. The ones who finish the work are the ones who learn to take the first step in the direction of what they know is coming before the confirmation arrives. The first territory where something is already moving is your inner world, the interior landscape of who you are. And I want to be specific about what this shift feels like, because it is subtle enough that you might have been dismissing it rather than recognizing it for what it actually is. There is a new kind of clarity that has been arriving in you in brief moments, not sustained yet, not constant, but present in a way that it was not 6 months ago. Moments where you know something with a certainty that bypasses the usual process of reasoning your way to a conclusion. Moments where the noise in your mind drops without you deliberately quieting it, and something underneath the noise speaks with a precision and a specificity that surprises you. Moments where a direction becomes obvious that was murky before. Where a decision that you had been circling for weeks suddenly resolves into a clear answer that does not require further deliberation. These moments have been arriving. They have been brief, and you may have been too exhausted or too cautious to fully trust them. But they have been arriving. What this represents is not your imagination rewarding you for endurance. It is your brain and your spirit arriving simultaneously at a new level of integration. The wilderness work, the kava of all those years, the kairos calibration that has been happening beneath the surface of your circumstances, all of it has been preparing your interior life for a quality of clarity that chosen ones need in order to do the work that only they can do. You cannot navigate complex, significant, world-changing work on blurry vision. And so, before the external doors open, the internal sight is sharpened. What you have been experiencing in those brief moments of unexpected clarity is not a fluke. It is your new normal beginning to establish itself. What you should not do in this territory is dismiss the clarity because it arrives in small packages. The chosen ones who miss their moments most consistently are the ones who are waiting for a dramatic, undeniable, unmistakable thunderbolt of divine direction that removes all ambiguity before they act. That thunderbolt almost never comes. What comes instead are precisely these quiet, precise, brief moments of knowing that arrive in ordinary circumstances and require the kind of attentiveness that the wilderness has been training you to have. When the clarity comes, however small the moment, write it down. Take it seriously. Let it accumulate. Because clarity does not always announce itself at full volume. Sometimes it whispers in the margins of an ordinary day, and the ones who catch it are the ones who have learned, through long practice, to listen at that frequency. What you can trust in territory is that the interior shift is leading somewhere real. The clarity is not random, it's directional. It is pointing consistently and specifically toward the work. And the work, when you follow the thread of the clarity, will become progressively more visible, more defined, and more actionable the further into this new season you move. The second territory, where something is already moving, is your relational world. And this is the territory where the shift can feel most disorienting if you do not understand what it means. Because what is happening in your relationship right now is not a sign that something is wrong. It is a sign that something is changing. And change in the relational landscape of a chosen one at this stage of their journey almost always feels uncomfortable before it feels right. Some people who have been in your life for a long time are beginning to drift. Not dramatically, not through conflict or betrayal in most cases, just a gentle, mutual pulling apart, a sense that the connection is thinning without either of you fully choosing for it to thin. You still care about these people. The history is real. The love in many cases is real. But there is a growing divergence between where you are going and where the relationship was built to go. And that divergence is creating a natural separation that feels like loss, but is actually alignment. The people who are drifting out of your relational inner circle right now are not being taken from you as punishment. They are releasing you into the next season that their presence, however loving, would have made harder to enter fully. At the same time, and this is the part that chosen ones often miss because they are so focused on the grief of what is drifting away, new people have begun to appear. Not in large numbers, not dramatically, but with a specific quality that is different from most of the relational encounters you have been having. People who seem to recognize something in you that most people around you do not see. People whose language, whose questions, whose curiosity about life and purpose and meaning resonates with something in you that has not had enough company in recent seasons. People who arrive and immediately, almost inexplicably, feel like they belong in the territory of where you are going, rather than in the territory of where you have been. What you should not do in this territory is hold so tightly to what is drifting that you miss what is arriving. Grief for the connections that are changing is appropriate and real. But grief that becomes grip, that becomes the desperate effort to preserve the relational landscape exactly as it has been, will cost you the new connections that this season is trying to bring you. Let what is meant to drift, drift with love, with gratitude for what it was, with no bitterness about what it is becoming. And stay attentive enough to notice and welcome what is arriving, even when the new feels fragile and unfamiliar compared to the old. What you can trust in this territory is that the relational realignment is not leaving you more alone. It is positioning you for the specific community that the work requires. Chosen ones cannot finish the work assigned to them in relational isolation. The work needs witnesses, collaborators, people who can carry certain parts of the vision that you cannot carry alone. The people who are beginning to appear in your life are not accidental arrivals. They are being positioned around the work, and your recognition of them, that sense of inexplicable resonance, is your spirit identifying the ones who were sent specifically for this season. The third territory where something is already moving is the territory of resources and opportunity. And I want to talk about this one carefully because it is the territory where chosen ones are most vulnerable to misreading the signs in both directions. Either becoming impatient because the provision has not yet arrived in the volume or the form they expected, or becoming passive because they are waiting for resources to appear before they take the steps that would actually open the channels through which those resources flow. What is already moving in this territory is not yet fully visible, but there are signs if you have the eyes to see them. An unexpected conversation that opens a door you did not know existed. A connection made in an unlikely place that has a thread leading somewhere you had not anticipated. An idea arriving with unusual clarity and specificity that contains within it a seed of provision you have not yet followed far enough to see the full fruit of. A sense that certain things that required enormous effort in previous seasons are beginning to require slightly less effort, as if the friction is not fully gone, but the resistance is starting to ease. These are the early of what is coming in this territory. They are not the fullness. The fullness is still assembling itself in the invisible territory just ahead of your current position. But the early signs are real, and they are present, and they are pointing in the same direction that the interior clarity and the relational realignment are all pointing, which is forward, toward the work, toward the completion of what was assigned specifically to you. What you should not do in this territory is measure the incoming provision by the scale of what is needed and conclude from the gap that nothing is actually moving. The early movement of resource and opportunity almost never arrives at the scale of the full need. It arrives as a seed, as a first sign, as the initial confirmation that the channel is opening, even if the full flow has not yet begun. The chosen ones who miss the provision most often are the ones who were looking for a flood when heaven was sending a stream, expecting that the abundance would arrive all at once when it was designed to arrive progressively, as a confirmation of each step of faith rather than as a replacement for the need to take the steps. What you can trust in this territory is that the provision will match the assignment, not your version of the assignment, the small, safe, risk-managed version you have been attempting to fit the vision into because the larger version felt too exposed. The real version, the full-sized vision that lives at the deepest level of your calling, that version has corresponding provision attached to it that is already in motion. The measure of what is coming is not what you have been asking for. It is what the work actually requires. And the work requires more than you have been willing to believe you deserve to receive. So let me ask you to do one thing as we close this territory of the conversation. Type the words "I am ready" in the comments. Not as performance, not because you feel completely ready, because the kind of ready that chosen ones feel before they step into their next season is never a feeling of total preparedness. It is a feeling of willingness. And willingness is what heaven moves in response to. Not your perfection, not your full readiness, your willingness to take the next step in the direction of the work even before all three territories have fully resolved into visible confirmation. Type "I am ready" and mean it at whatever percentage you genuinely can. 40% willing is enough to begin. Heaven does not wait for 100%. Heaven moves on the honest yes of someone who is still afraid but choosing to step forward anyway. And if this message has been meeting you somewhere real today, if these three territories have described something you have been living inside of, share this with someone who is in the same season. Not because the numbers matter, but because somewhere in your circle, there is another chosen one who has been trying to read the signs alone, who has been sensing the shift without having the language for it, who needs someone to name what they are already feeling in their chest. Your share might be the naming they have been waiting for. The three territories we just walked through together, the interior clarity arriving in quiet moments, the relational landscape realigning itself around the work, the provision beginning to move in channels you are only beginning to see. All of that is pointing towards something that I want to name for you now in the most direct and personal way I know how. Because you have spent enough of this season having the shape of your destiny described in general terms. You have heard enough about calling and purpose and the significance of chosen ones in a way that felt true but also somehow just out of reach, as if the description always applied to someone slightly more prepared or slightly more healed or slightly further along than you currently are. What I want to do right now is close that distance. I want to name what is coming for chosen ones in general, but what is already true about you specifically in this moment, as you are. With everything you carry and everything the journey has cost you, and everything that is still unfinished inside of you. You are a cycle breaker. I want to sit with that name for a moment before I explain it, because names carry weight, and this one needs to land in you before it is unpacked. A cycle breaker is not simply someone who had a hard life and survived it. It is not merely a person who overcame adversity or who refused to repeat the patterns of their upbringing. A cycle breaker is someone whose presence in a family line, in a community, in an industry, in a generation represents a fundamental interruption of what was previously inevitable. Something that was going to continue, generation after generation, loss after loss, limitation after limitation, until it encountered you. And in encountering you, it stopped. Not because you were more talented than those who came before you, not because you were more favored or more spiritually advanced or more deserving of breakthrough, but because you were the one chosen in this generation, in this family, in this particular territory of human experience, to be the place where the pattern ends. The work you are called to finish on this earth is not just about what you produce. It is about what you interrupt. Every chosen one carries both an assignment to build something and an assignment to break something. The building is the visible part, the work that people will eventually see and name and celebrate. But the breaking, the interruption of cycles that have been running for years or decades or generations, that is often the most significant and the least visible part of the work. And it is the part that costs the most, because cycles do not break without resistance. Patterns do not end without a fight. The thing that is being interrupted has momentum, and the cycle breaker absorbs the force of that momentum in their own body, their own relationships, their own psychological and spiritual life before the interruption is complete. The weight you have been carrying that has felt inexplicable, the heaviness that did not fully belong to your own story, the grief that seemed larger than your own losses, the exhaustion that went deeper than your own circumstances could fully account for. That is the weight of the cycle you are breaking. You have been absorbing force. You have been the point of interruption, and that is the most costly and the most sacred position in any family line or community or generation. The one who absorbs the force of what was heading toward everyone behind them is not simply brave, they are appointed. Every person who comes after you in your family line will never fully know what you broke on their behalf. The children who will not inherit what you interrupted. The patterns that will not be passed down because you were the one who stopped them in your generation. The cycles of lack, of limitation, of specific kinds of pain that have run through your family or your community for longer than anyone can remember, they end with you. Not because you declared it in a moment of spiritual optimism, but because you have lived through the weight of the interruption. You have absorbed the force of the cycle in your own life. And you are still standing, still here, still pressing forward toward the work. That is not small. That is one of the most significant things a human being can do on this earth. Now I want to take you somewhere. I want to give you an exercise that is not intellectual but experiential. Not something to think about, but something to actually do with your imagination right now, in real time, as you listen. And I want you to take it seriously, because what happens in the imagination is not separate from what happens in reality. The interior experience of this exercise, if you allow it to be real, rather than treating it as merely metaphorical, will do something in you that description alone cannot do. Picture yourself standing at a threshold. Not a metaphorical threshold in the abstract, a specific one. A doorway, tall and wide, with the frame worn smooth by time, as if many people have passed through it before you, and many more will pass through it after. You are standing just outside this doorway. You can feel the surface beneath your feet, solid and real. You can feel the temperature of the air around you, and it carries something. Not cold, not warm exactly, but charged, alive. As if the air itself is aware that something significant is about to happen. Now turn around. Look back at the path behind you. Look at the terrain you have crossed to arrive at this threshold. Do not hurry this. Let yourself actually see it. The long stretches where the road was unclear and you walked anyway. The places where you sat down because you did not think you could continue, and then you got up and continued. The seasons that looked like detours, but were the most direct route available to where you are standing right now. The relationships, the losses, nights that lasted too long, the mornings that arrived before you were ready for them. The work you started and set down and picked up again. The versions of yourself you have had to let go of along the way. Not because they were worthless, but because they were not big enough to carry what is coming. Look at all of it, not with shame, not with regret, with the eyes of someone who has finally arrived at enough altitude to see the shape of the whole journey, rather than just the difficulty of each individual step. And as you look at it, let something settle in you that may not have been able to settle before now. The journey was not wasted, not one step of it, not one season, not one loss, not one version of yourself that you had to release along the way. All of it was the path. All of it was the preparation. All of it was the kava, the braiding, the assembly of the rope that is strong enough now to hold the weight of what you are about to carry through that threshold. Now turn back toward the door. Look at what is in front of you. You do not need to see everything that is on the other side. You do not need full visibility of the whole territory before you take the step. What you need to see, and what I want you to notice right now, is that the door is already open. Not slightly ajar. Open. Wide enough for everything you are, everything you carry, every part of the calling and the cost, and the cycle breaker identity, and the work that is waiting. Wide enough for all of it to walk through together. You have not been standing outside this threshold, waiting for it to open. You have been standing outside it waiting to believe that you were allowed to walk through. And what this moment is, what this message has been building toward, is the simple, profound, irreversible recognition that the permission you were waiting for was never coming from outside you. It was always inside you. The one who placed the calling placed the permission inside it. The work and the authority to do it were assigned together. You were not given the vision and told to wait for someone else to authorize the entry. You were given the vision as the authorization. You are already standing at the threshold. You have been for longer than you knew, and the step forward is not a leap into the unknown. It is a step into what has already been prepared, into the Kairos moment that has been assembling itself in the invisible territory just ahead of where you have been standing, into the season that the wilderness was always building toward, into the work that only you can finish, because only you were assembled through the specific combination of gifts and wounds, and years and losses that the finishing requires. So let me speak a blessing over you now, not as a formal religious act, but as the most honest thing I know how to say to someone standing where you are standing. May the clarity that has been arriving in brief moments become your daily frequency. May the relationships that are aligning around your work bring you the specific companionship that this season requires. May the provision that is already in motion reach you in forms that exceed what you allowed yourself to believe you deserved to receive. May the cycles you have been breaking complete their interruption in your generation, so that everyone who comes after you in your family and your community inherits a different starting point than the one you were given. May the work that has been waiting inside you find its way into the world through your hands, in your voice, with your specific, irreplaceable perspective. And may you walk through that threshold with every part of yourself, leaving nothing behind at the door, taking every wound and every gift and every year of the journey with you into the territory that has been prepared specifically for the person you have become through all of. You are a cycle breaker. The pattern ends with you. The work begins now. You are standing at the threshold. The blessing has been spoken. The name has been given. The cycle that was supposed to continue has met the one person it could not outlast, and that person is you. And now, in this specific moment, after everything this message has walked you through, after the recognition and the grief and the science and the ancient language, the territories of shift and the exercise at the doorway, we arrive at the part that chosen ones most need and most resist in equal measure. We arrive at the part about action, not inspiration, not more understanding, not another layer of beautiful framing around the reality of your calling. Action, specific, concrete, immediate, available to you today action. Because the greatest danger for a chosen one at this stage of the journey is not that they will abandon the calling. It is that they will honor the calling emotionally, spiritually, intellectually, in every interior way, while continuing to defer the practical expression of it into a future that keeps moving forward just ahead of wherever they are. The chosen ones who never finish the work are not, in most cases, the ones who stopped believing. They are the ones who kept believing beautifully while never quite moving concretely. And the gap between beautiful belief and concrete movement is the exact gap that this part of the conversation exists to close. So I want to give you three things, three specific, real, actionable shifts that you can begin today, not when the season changes, not when you feel more ready, not when the resources arrive at full volume or the relationships are fully realigned, or the clarity reaches the level of certainty that removes all risk. Today, with what you have, where you are, as the person you currently are, not the person you will become after the next season of growth. The first action is what I want to call the completion audit, and it is exactly what it sounds like. I want you to make a list, physical or digital, of every significant piece of work that you have started and not finished. Not every small, incomplete task, not the administrative backlog or the errands that have been postponed. The significant work, the things that carry weight. The creative project that has been sitting in a folder for months or years because something about moving it toward completion has felt too exposing or too uncertain or too large. The conversation that needs to happen with a specific person but has been deferred because the timing never feels quite right. The decision that has been circling in your awareness without landing because every time you get close to making it, the doubt arrives with enough force to push it back into the category of not yet. The business or the ministry or the creative practice or the relational commitment that exists in your mind with complete clarity but has not yet been fully translated into the world outside your mind. Write them down, all of them, without judgment about why they are unfinished or how long they have been waiting. Just the honest inventory of what is incomplete, because you cannot finish what you have not named, and you cannot prioritize what you have not laid out in front of you clearly enough to see the shape of it. Once the list exists, I want you to do one specific thing with it. I want you to identify the single item on that list whose completion would create the most momentum for everything else. Not the easiest item, not the smallest one. The one whose finishing would change the most. The one that, if it were done, would make the other items on the list feel more possible rather than equally daunting. That item is your primary assignment for this season, not the whole list. One item, the one that unlocks the rest. This is how the work gets finished. Not by attempting everything simultaneously as a burst of inspired energy that is impossible to sustain, but by identifying the one thing whose completion changes the landscape for everything else, and bringing the full weight of your available focus and energy and time to that one thing until it is done. Chosen ones are called to finish the work. Finishing requires sequencing, and sequencing requires the honesty to name what is most important, rather than treating everything as equally urgent. The second action is what I want to call the daily 5 minutes of forward, and it is as simple and as demanding as its name suggests. Every single day, regardless of how you feel, regardless of how much time is available, regardless of whether the circumstances are favorable, or the motivation is present, or the clarity is at its highest level, you give 5 minutes to the primary item on your completion audit. 5 minutes of actual, concrete movement toward the completion of the thing that is most important. 5 minutes sounds small enough to be dismissible. I want to tell you that it is not. It is not small. It is the most radical commitment a chosen one in a deferral pattern can make, because it eliminates the primary excuse that keeps the work unfinished. The excuse is never really that you do not have enough time. It is that you are waiting for enough time, enough energy, enough inspiration, enough of the right conditions to arrive simultaneously before you begin. And those conditions almost never arrive simultaneously. So the work waits, and the waiting compounds into months and years of beautiful intention that never became actual completion. 5 minutes every day does not require the right conditions. It does not require inspiration or optimal energy or a cleared schedule or an aligned circumstance. It requires only the decision to move, however slightly, in the direction of the work before anything else in the day has the chance to consume the intention. 5 minutes of writing is more than 0 words on the page. 5 minutes of making the call is more than the call that was never made. 5 minutes of working on the thing that matters is more than another day of planning to work on the thing that matters when conditions improve. Do this for 30 days without breaking the streak. Not 30 days of large, dramatic, visibly significant progress. 30 days of 5 minutes of actual movement, and watch what happens to the landscape of the work by the end of those 30 days. Watch what the accumulation of daily forward motion does to the internal resistance that has been keeping the completion at arm's length. Watch what consistency does to the clarity about what the next step is. The 5 minutes rarely stay 5 minutes once you have actually begun them. But even when they do, 5 minutes multiplied by 30 days is 150 minutes of work that did not exist before. And 150 minutes of consistent, intentional movement toward the most important thing you are called to complete is not a small thing. It is the beginning of finishing. The third action is the one that chosen ones resist most deeply, and that resistance is itself the confirmation that it is the right action. The third action is to receive help, specifically to identify one person in your current life who can see the work clearly enough to hold you accountable to the 5 minutes, and to tell that person explicitly and vulnerably what you are doing and ask them to check in with you about it. Not to manage you, not to take responsibility for your progress. Simply to ask you, once a week, whether you moved forward this week, whether the 5 minutes happened, whether the work is progressing. Chosen ones struggle profoundly with this action because the calling feels too personal, too sacred, too interior to expose to the potential misunderstanding or inadequate response of another person. Because the work has been held so privately for so long that sharing even the outline of it feels like an act of dangerous vulnerability. Because there is a deep and understandable fear born from the experience of having the vision met with doubt or dismissal in earlier seasons, that naming the work to another person will somehow diminish it or make it more vulnerable to being undermined. But isolation is one of the most effective tools that the resistance to chosen one's work employs. When the work stays entirely inside you, entirely private, entirely unwitnessed by any other human presence, it has no anchor in the external world. It exists only in the interior, and the interior is vulnerable to the particular storms of doubt and discouragement that chosen ones weather in the small hours of the morning. When the work has even one witness, even one person who knows what you are trying to finish, and who cares whether it gets finished, it gains an external anchor. It becomes more real. It becomes harder to abandon without consequence. It becomes part of a relationship rather than only a private aspiration. You do not need to share the full vision with your accountability person. You do not need to give them access to all of the depth and complexity of the calling. You simply need to say, I am working on something important, and I need someone to ask me every week whether I moved forward. That is enough. That is the minimum viable accountability that begins to give the work an external reality to match its internal one. Now, I want to connect these 3 actions to something we talked about earlier in this message, because I do not want you to walk away with the impression that the practical and the spiritual are separate territories requiring separate approaches. They are not. The completion audit is a spiritual act. It is the act of standing before your own calling with enough honesty to see it clearly. The daily 5 minutes of forward is a spiritual discipline. It is the daily practice of choosing the work over the comfort of deferral, the kava made concrete in the ordinary minutes of an ordinary day, and receiving help is a profoundly spiritual movement. It is the act of releasing the prideful isolation that tells you the calling is yours to carry alone, and acknowledging that the work was never meant to be finished in solitude. The genius wave, which we talked about in depth earlier in this message, fits into this framework as the neurological infrastructure for all 3 actions. The 7 minutes of daily audio that Dr. James Rivers developed is not separate from the work. It is the preparation of the brain that makes the work more accessible. When you use it before your daily 5 minutes of forward, you are bringing a brain that has been moved into its optimal state of clarity and creative receptivity to the most important work of your calling. The theta and gamma frequencies that the audio activates are precisely the frequencies associated with the kind of breakthrough thinking, creative integration, thinking that the decision making that the completion audit and the accountability relationship both require. If you have been feeling the yes about the genius wave as we have moved through this message, the link is still in the pinned comment. Still at $39 for this window, still backed by the 90-day guarantee that removes the risk from the decision. But regardless of whether the genius wave is part of your toolkit or not, the 3 actions stand. The completion audit, the daily 5 minutes of forward, the accountability relationship. These are available to you right now, today, with no additional resources required beyond the willingness to begin. And willingness is the one thing I know you have. because you are still here, still listening, still reaching toward the work even after the season that has tried in so many ways to convince you that the work was either too large or too late or too unlikely to be worth continuing to reach for. You are still reaching. That reaching is itself the first action, and the first action is always the one that makes the second action possible. Type the words "I receive" in the comments right now, not as a passive acknowledgement, but as an active declaration. A declaration that you receive the clarity about the work. You receive the accountability to finish it. You receive the provision that is moving toward it. You receive the identity of cycle breaker and everything that identity requires of you. You receive the Kairos moment that has been assembling itself for this exact season of your life. Type "I receive" and let the declaration be. The bridge between the beautiful interior knowing and the concrete exterior action that this season is asking of you. The work is waiting. It has been patient, but it is not going to wait indefinitely. And you are not the kind of person who finishes a message like this one and does nothing. You never were. That is why you are here. I want to stay with you for a moment before we close. Not to introduce something new, not to add another layer to what has already been built, but simply to be here with you in this final stretch of what has been, I believe, one of the most important conversations you have allowed yourself to have in a very long time. Because what you have done today by showing up to this message, by staying through the difficult parts, by allowing the grief to be named and the calling to be confirmed, and the action to be outlined, is not a small thing. It is the kind of showing up that most people are not willing to do, and I do not want to rush past that without honoring it. You showed up today not fully convinced that anything would land. I know that. Chosen ones in this season carry a particular mixture of longing and guardedness that makes every new message, every new voice, every new source of potential confirmation feel like a test they are not sure they want to take. Because the hope that gets disappointed again is harder to carry than the hope that was never raised. And yet you showed up anyway. You stayed anyway. You let this reach you anyway. That is not passivity. That is one of the most active, most courageous, most faith-filled things a human being can do in a season that has given them legitimate reasons to stop trusting. So before I say anything else, I want to say thank you. Not in the generic way that fills the space between one section and the next, but specifically, personally, for the part of you that was tired enough to close this and did not. For the part of you that has heard versions of this message before and chose to listen again anyway. For the part of you that knows the work is real and has been carrying that knowing through seasons that provided almost no external confirmation of it. That part of you, the part that keeps showing up, is the most important part of your story. It is the part that heaven watches most closely, and it has not gone unwitnessed. I want you to know something that I need you to hold on to past this moment, past today, into the weeks and months ahead when this conversation has faded from immediate memory and the ordinary demands of your ordinary life have reasserted their usual volume. You are not alone in this. Right now, as you listen to these words, in countries and time zones and circumstances as varied as the human experience itself, other chosen ones are walking into this exact same message. They are hearing the same things you have heard today and feeling in their own chests the same recognition you have felt. A woman in a city you will never visit is typing, "I see it," into a comment section with hands that are slightly trembling. Because something in those two words feels like the most honest thing she has said in months. A man who has been carrying his calling in silence for years is listening to this in a parked car and sitting with a stillness he has not been able to access recently because something in this message finally named the thing he has not had language for. Young people and older people and people in every variation of the season you are in are finding their way to these words because the one who authored their calling also authored the path that led them here. You are in a room full of people you cannot see, and every single one of them is carrying something similar to what you carry. None of them arrived here by accident. None of them are here because an algorithm made a random selection. They are here because they were led here, just as you were led here. And the community of chosen ones who are waking up to the reality of their calling in this season is larger, more diverse, more geographically and culturally and circumstantially varied than you can probably imagine from where you are right now. You are not an isolated case. You are part of a movement that is assembling itself quietly and powerfully in the invisible territory of human experience, and whose effects on the visible world are going to become undeniable in the years ahead. Now I want to give you something to do with your body before we close. Not with your mind, not with your emotions, with your body. Because the work of this message has been largely interior, and interior work needs a physical anchor to carry it past the moment of reception and into the territory of lasting transformation. I want you to picture yourself standing at the threshold we visited in Fund 8, that same doorway, tall and wide, with the worn frame and the charged air. You remember it. Let it come back into your imagination now with the same specificity as before. Feel the surface beneath your feet. Feel the quality of the air around you. Now, I want you to do something you did not do in the last exercise. I want you to picture everything you have been carrying through this season. All of it. The grief and the deferred work, and the relationships that have cost you, and the sleepless nights, and the weight of the cycle you are breaking, and the years of Chronos, time that measured longer than they needed to, because you were running the wrong instrument. I want you to picture all of that as a physical weight, a pack on your back. Heavy, real, with a texture and a mass that you can feel in your imagination as specifically as if it were actually there. And now I want you to take that pack off, slowly, not throwing it away, not pretending it did not exist, not minimizing what it cost you to carry it this far, but deliberately, intentionally, with full acknowledgement of how heavy it was and how long you carried it. I want you to set it down at the threshold, right there at the edge of the doorway. Leave it there, not because the experiences it represents did not happen or did not matter, but because what is on the other side of this threshold does not require you to carry the weight of the past into the future. What is on the other side requires your hands to be free, your back to be upright, your body to be unburdened enough to receive what is coming rather than spending all its energy managing what has already been. Set it down, let it stay there, and then, in your imagination, step through the doorway. Feel what the air is like on the other side. Notice what it feels like in your chest and your shoulders and your back when the weight is no longer there. This is not a permanent change accomplished by an exercise alone, but it is the rehearsal of the posture that the next season will requires. And rehearsal is how posture becomes instinct. The imagination is practicing what the life is about to do. You have stepped through. The threshold is behind you now, and what is in front of you is the territory of the finished work. The territory of the cycle breaker rubber who completed the interruption. The territory of the calling that was carried to its conclusion rather than deferred into another season of beautiful intention. Now I want to say something about this community, this channel, this ongoing conversation, because it matters for what comes next. If this message has given you something real today, if it has landed in a place that was waiting for exactly this kind of landing, I want to ask you to do two things. The first is to like this video, not as a gesture of politeness, but as a signal to the platform that this kind of content deserves to reach more people. Every chosen one who finds this message through the algorithm is a chosen one who had someone else's engagement to thank for making it visible. Your like is not for me. It is for the next person who needs this. The second is to share it. Send it to one specific person, not a broadcast to everyone you know, but one specific person who you know is in a season that this message would meet. The person who has been carrying the work in silence. The person who has been losing sleep over the gap between their calling and their current circumstances. The person whose name came to your mind somewhere in the middle of this message, because something in the content mapped directly onto something you know they are living. Send it to them without explanation. Let the message speak for itself. What you do for them by sending it is not a small favor. It is the act of a cycle breaker who has already begun the work of changing what is possible for the people around them. And subscribe if you are not already here as a regular part of this community, because this conversation does not end with this video. What we build together in this space, week after week, chosen one after chosen one finding their way to the message that names what they are carrying, is itself a piece of the work. It is the community that chosen ones in this generation have needed and have not always known where to find. You belong here. Your presence here matters. And your ongoing engagement with what this channel produces is not passive consumption. It is participation in something that is genuinely changing lives in ways that neither you nor I will be able to fully trace or measure. If you feel led to support this work financially, there is a way to do that in the description below. Every contribution goes directly into making more of these messages possible, into the time and the care and the research that goes into building content that actually meets people where they are rather than where it is convenient to pretend they are. I do not say this with pressure. I say it with honesty about what it costs to do this work at the level that it deserves to be done. And one final word about the Genius Wave. I am not going to make a strong closing pitch. You have heard everything that is true about it. You know what it does and why it does it, and who created it and what it costs and what guarantee protects the decision. If somewhere in the middle of this message, the Genius Wave met you in a place of genuine recognition, if the science of the 7 minutes connected to the spiritual reality of your calling in a way that felt like more than coincidence, if you know in the way that chosen ones know things that this is a yes for this season of your life, then it is waiting for you in the pinned comment below. The link is there. The offer is still open for this window, and the 90-day guarantee means that the decision costs you nothing if the experience does not deliver what it promises. But if today is not the day for that decision, what today has given you is still enough to change everything. The completion audit, the daily 5 minutes of forward, the accountability relationship, the threshold protocol, the willingness to set the pack down at the doorway and step through with your hands free. Those tools are yours now. They cost you nothing but the decision to use them. And the decision to use them is itself the beginning of the work being finished. You came here today as someone who was still in the middle of the calling. You are leaving as someone who has been named, positioned, equipped, and sent. Not by me. Through me, toward you, from the one who authored the calling before you had language to describe it. The work that is yours to finish on this earth is real. It has your name on it. And the season for finishing it is not coming. It is here. Go finish it.